Yeah, so just a quick recap of last week. Basically, what we do when we talk about executive functioning, it's a term that has rolled off of ADHD. And so, about 20 years ago or so, actually, the research has been around since the 70s, but I think across the country, we started talking about it 20 years ago. And so, we started talking about what is this executive functioning piece and what does it mean for somebody. So, in order for us to talk about it, we have to create something visual so a person can understand what we're referring to. So here's two examples from last week we shared. Executive functioning is like a pilot in a plane in a cockpit. The pilot has to make all these decisions with all these buttons. They have to be hit in the correct sequence, order, pattern, whatever it might be, given the environment and the weather outside. So this is one way that we talk about it with kids. We talk about it and give them a visual of it so they can start to actually understand, how am I managing the cockpit? Are we getting off the ground? Is the plane on? So we really take every piece of this metaphor and break it down for kids so that we can start to understand this more complicated concept of our executive functioning. And in the next slide, you'll see a picture of an orchestra conductor. And this is the same, concept, just some people like music and others like planes. So whatever works for your family, definitely share this with your kids. It helps them understand their ability to be in charge of something, their executive ability to be the orchestra conductor. So essentially all those people in the orchestra have different jobs and all of them have to be coordinated at the right time for the conductor to actually be successful at his job. And so in our brain, in the prefrontal cortex of our brain, we make decisions, we make choices. It's all about the timing and the sequence of those things, how we prioritize, how we sort and categorize information. And ironically, we have to talk about our emotions too, because we do certainly like to not talk about our emotions, which is way easier. But when it comes to performing, emotions are a huge brick wall that can get in the way. So we'll go to the next slide. And this is just a real quick recap of last week. So basically, if you look at this picture, you see on the left side, activation, planning, focus, and memory are three words we would use to describe the prefrontal cortex. All of these words are going to describe executive functioning, but the prefrontal cortex on the front of the brain, which is a more advanced and later developed part of the brain, it plans, it activates, it organizes, it focuses. There's a memory to it. We use our learning senses to use it for memory and organization. And then on the back of the brain, we have emotions. And so you'll see the boxes corresponding with emotions and self-monitoring and flexibility. And what's happening here on the back of the brain is that we have two parts of the brain fighting over domination, the oldest part and the newest part. So go figure. So the oldest part, the emotion, self-monitoring, and flexibility, all live in the limbic system. And it's a very, very powerful system. So a lot of times when kids can't get going, they don't perform in class, they don't perform at home, or we're looking for performance and we're looking for why are you not able to perform? We're looking at these 6 different areas. And you can see on the left side that these are more prefrontal cortex, decision making, but on the back end with the emotions, if we don't handle the emotions, we can never actually calm down the limbic system. And so then we don't allow our executive functioning skills to begin. So we have to get emotions under control so we can go, I'm going to do this and I'm going to be successful. And this is how I'm going to do it. I'm going to make a plan. I'm going to have a focus. And so today we're going to look at all the ways that you can do these things with kids, whether you're in home with them or at school or wherever you are. We're going to show some exact exercises for these skills right here, these executive functioning skills. So last week, we said this last week, we looked really closely at executive functioning because for me as a teacher and a coach, I have to help kids perform. So my list of executive functioning is on the left side. So there's, 12 things on that list. We have response inhibition, working memory, emotional control, initiation, planning, organization, time management. So you can see a long list of things that I focus on with kids. And on the right-hand side, you can see like a corresponding question that goes with it. So we can start someplace. So we can start thinking about thinking, because that's what we're going to do. We're going to activate the part of our brain that has to think about thinking. So that's just a recap of last week. There's much more information last week about this, but from this point, we're going to move forward into the new exercises for this week. But we'll start with the learning style we ended with last week.
Yeah, so if everyone can take a moment, we all have a primary learning style. And so take a moment and look at this. How do you remember best? Are you visual paired with verbal? Do you need visual pictures? Are you better at processing auditory information? Is it relational, meaning you want to interact with someone to be able to ask questions back and forth? Or is it kinesthetic? You want to be up, moving, doing, actually living and breathing. So if all of you could take a moment and type in the chat box, how do you remember best? What do you think is your primary learning style?
And just to give you a quick example, if you can't think of what it is, it's when you meet somebody, how do you remember their name? Do you hear it? Do you need to see it written down? How do you remember the person's name who you've just met?
Lots of visuals. Visual.
That's funny because this actually aligns with Bloomsburg theory that we teach to 90%. I mean, 90% of our teaching is visual. That we are 90% of the time teaching to the visual learner. But it's interesting.
Most of our instruction is auditory.
Yes.
It's just presenting and talking, or even when we're having conversations with people, there's not a lot of visual pictures or visual information brought in. So it's critical to remember when you're working with your child or students that you are pairing the learning with visual. And actually thinking about if you're with a group of students, how, like Ernesto said, a combination, many of them have combinations. And so trying to, while you're instructing, hit on all learning styles. And then also, even if someone is visual, you would, as their primary, you'd still want to bring in the other learning styles to bring forth all senses. And that then connects the memory to the mind. Go ahead, Jen, sorry.
Yeah, I love that you said that. You know, when I think of what learning is and what it is in our brain and neuroplasticity, I think of like a rope. Each of our senses is kind of creating a neuroplastic pathway. And the more often we repeat that sensory feeling, that thinking, feeling, seeing, touching, being around it thing, we're reinforcing that thought, that learning style. So when we're as a teacher, what we're always talking about with kids is that we want them to connect to prior knowledge. Well, your prior knowledge is that rope. It's that cord that's made of all these different threads of your learning style. Things you've touched, things you've seen, things that were important to you. All of those things create neurons in your brain, and those neurons create pathways. And the more often we use those pathways, the better we remember something. And of course, as a teacher, we always want to connect all of those sensories together because we know we'll have a better chance of creating something called prior knowledge. Like, oh, you're learning something new today. Let me teach you something that you already know and how it connects to what you're going to learn today. So to me, it's really important. You know, we have all these IEPs and 504 meetings we attend. Donna, you know what I'm talking about. And what we're always asking teachers is to really teach to this person's learning style. We're literally saying, please make it more visual so they can see it, and then follow it up with auditory so they can hear it, and then they need to touch it and experience it to manipulate it to remember it, because we aren't just going to remember it if we just talk about it, and we're not going to remember it if we see it just one time. So it's an interesting thing. I just wanted to add that because that's really important with executive functioning and all the skills you're going to see today. Each of the skills I'm going to show you have to connect one to the next, because it's all about prior knowledge. Next, thank you. So obviously this is just a summary slide that's talking about how learning occurs when we use our head, our heart, and our stomach, all places where we have brain neurons, to connect. So when we connect our head, our heart, and our gut, we're connecting to new and prior information. And so there's this theory that if we just ignore it, it should go away. And so there's a lot of really cool science. I won't take much time to talk about this, but there's a lot of really cool science that proves that ignoring something absolutely does not make it go away. That this is a science experiment I'm sharing with you that's showing proof that when we have an idea that forms in our head, we can now see that in an MRI or SPECT imagery, all sorts of different ways now. And so it's pretty cool that it reinforces the concept that if somebody wanted to just forget about something or ignore it, it doesn't just go away. So we see kids who are like, oh, I'm just going to stay under the radar and I'm not going to learn in this class because it's too hard, and it's never going to go away. The situation only becomes worse, and we keep thinking about how bad the situation is because that's the way our brain's designed. And because of this will bring us to our next slide. Because this is the way we are wired to learn neurologically in our brain, the next slide, we ask people to measure kids' brains all the time. And so these are some of the skills or some of the tests that you can request from a doctor or a school to test for executive functioning. But these are the executive functions. And this is how we're going to see how we can't just ignore it. It's not going to go away. So we're going to tackle 6 main executive functions. So the next slide will show those 6, or actually this one shows 9. And I wanted to actually bring this to our attention because it's really important. This shows a list of 9 executive function full scale. And actually it's introducing ADHD and executive functioning on one slide. So what's really important to know as a specialist is that you want to delineate between what is ADHD and what is executive functioning. So the next slide will show that, hopefully. There's a slide. There we go. So ADHD on the left side really is the impulse. It's the response inhibition that we try to teach kids how to do when they're 2 years old. You know, don't eat that marshmallow until I say so. It's impulse control, it's attention focus, and hyperactivity. That's what ADHD is. And you'll see people call those the executive skills all the time. And it's true because they're definitely part of what's happening on the right-hand side, which is really the executive functioning of planning, focus, memory, emotions, self-monitoring, and flexibility. And the reason why I choose these 6 words specifically is, as I was mentioning last week, we have a very big issue in our country of defining what is research executive functioning and what is application executive functioning. So we've got some pretty big questions to weed through. So these 6 items come from Russell Barkley's 30 years of longitudinal data, what is executive functioning. So we're going to go through each one of these things, and I'm going to show you some pretty cool skills. I'm going to turn my video off. That's a great idea. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm going to turn my video off. So on the left side, there's that list again. We're going to look at how planning leads to activation. We're going to look at how focus leads to initiation. And each of these are going to be given with specific examples of what we use as academic coaches in the last 13 years here at Learning Foundations. And in fact, we created a book, and that's why Dawn has brought me to you today, is because essentially what we've done is we've taken executive functioning and we've made it visual, auditory, kinesthetic, experiential, and relational. And that's what you're going to see, our variety of those. And so this is a book we created at Learning Foundations called Mote Note. So my Mote Note, my motivational notebook. And so you're going to see these ideas, and that's where they're going to come from. They're going to come from this book alone. We'll do the next slide. So the first one we have to think about is planning and activating a thought or a goal, right? So it has to be important. So what is something that you want to plan or activate? And then you're thinking about how that connects to your learning styles. So if I'm going to set a goal, if I'm going to start to say, hey, I'm going to do my homework on Monday nights, I have to actually make a plan and activate that plan for it to actually become a plan. So we want to think about, what do I need to see? Do I need to put it in my calendar? Do I need to write it? Does it need to be on my iPhone to send a reminder? You have to make executive functioning very literal and very tangible. If you don't make it tangible, it will just kind of dissipate and disappear. But this is what we call executive functioning, is we're teaching kids how to learn. So we're teaching kids, how do I activate these executive functions to set a goal, to be motivated? All these things have to be activated, and they have to become like concrete in some way. So how do you see time? This is an important question, because we know, for instance, with kids with ADHD, that there's 3 different kinds of time. That in the little tips paper, you'll see that there's real time, where it's literally the time right now. There's estimated time. It's going to take me 10 minutes to go from A to B. And there's the literal time. Oh, I'm sorry, I have that written twice. I meant to write not literal time, but the future. So there's time in the future. So tomorrow will come sooner than I anticipate. So we have 3 kinds of time: real time, estimated time, and then the time tomorrow, future. So that's important, that we understand that in executive functioning, that timing piece is critical in our brain, because our brain is all about setting forth something in an organized fashion in order to perform something by a certain day and time. So this is really important. We start with, how do you need to see time? How do we make this plan and activate it so it becomes visual? So we'll go to the next slide. So for you, are you a phone person, a tablet person, or a watch person, or a paper person? And I know that seems like a really strange question, because schools now don't have paper very often. But I will say that when I go to IEPs and 504s, it's absolutely something I would request. I would request papers, and I would request books, because we get a lot of kinesthetic and experiential learning when we turn pages and highlight things, when we write things down. We're accessing our long-term memory, because we're using our learning skill to put something in place. So our long-term memory is what we need to focus on. So do I need to see time weekly or monthly? What do I need on my calendar to show? So I'm going to show you 2 examples that we will present to kids, and they can pick what they prefer. So on the left, we might talk about, maybe this student struggles to get up in the morning and isn't being very responsible and isn't getting to class on time or to school on time. So on the left, we have an example of, well, what does your morning routine look like? Because there's real time, and then there's the estimation of what you think time is. And so for kids, we kind of wrestle through this on the left. We'll talk about estimated time. How long does it take to get up in the morning and do all of these things, including hygiene? And then what is the real time that it really does take, and this is why you're late? Well, they get it once they see it. They're like, well, all I have to do is like wake up 10 minutes earlier. And so it becomes something that we can actually solve and create a problem or solution for, because it's become concrete. On the right-hand side, this is something that some of our high schoolers use to actually lock in study time and sports. So this is a visual snapshot of your week. It's Sunday through Saturday, and it's broken by time of the day. So it could start at 6 a.m. or 7 a.m., and then it goes all the way to 12 p.m. midnight. And each of those blocks represent 1 hour of time. So we try in the example, we try to identify for kids, what do you need to see in your week? What work do you need to see? What classes? And when we went online, man, this was a really important calendar for every single kid that we worked with, for sure, because now we had to see an online school, and we had to take an online school and actually make it tangible. So this is how we did it. We put it on here and said, okay, so on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays that are B days, and then Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays that are A days, what does that look like? And so we would have A days and B days, and it would help kids go, okay, so I know that on Monday I need to wake up at this time because my first class starts at this time. But the other parts of executive function that needed to be built in are, when are you going to read a book? When are you going to study for a test or memorize your vocab? So all of those skills that are very easily invisible, and they simply fall off the radar for many kids and adults, we have to make it tangible by putting it on this visual snapshot of your week, and then it gets done. It gets managed, and it becomes an executive function where we're creating neural connections across the right and left side of the brain, and we're making pathways, and we're creating new habits. And of course, you have to do it 34 times before it becomes a habit, but at least we're starting out with visuals and relational pieces. We'll go to the next slide. And Donna, what do you think? Is there anything you want to add to this?
No, I'm good for right now. Keep going.
All right, well, you just let me know. You just give me the old, because I can see you.
For sure. Got it.
On the second one, the second step in executive functioning is focusing and initiating. So that means that you're actually initiating and beginning the task. And it sounds silly because if you're a type A person, initiating a task is something you start right when you get out of bed. But for some kids, I mean, no, actually for all kids, because it really is developmental, we have to teach kids initiation. We have to teach them routines and procedures and all of these things. So that's something that we get from our executive ability, from our prefrontal cortex. But we have to start with, how are you feeling? And a lot of times people might even think of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like we kind of have to start at the bottom layer and say, did you get sleep? Are you hungry? Are you ready to do this? Where are you at? And then we talk about their emotions, because we have to get through some of the emotions sometimes to really get ready and focused to perform. So these are,
And that, I do want to jump in here. That's a big social emotional learning skill that we at Generation Schools Network focus on for schools and districts to implement, because if they can understand feelings, have someone to talk to their feelings about, then research has shown and proven that students are much more successful in all environments of life.
social emotional intelligence is actually the biggest indicator of life success. It's not grades and it's not test scores. It's not which school you went to. The greatest indicator that science keeps proving over and over is social emotional intelligence leads to success. So, with that being said, of course we have to talk about emotions, right? So, do our feelings flood our brain and take over and shut down our ability to make decisions? Do you feel like you know how to calm down your emotions when you're having an emotional storm? So, the next two slides are going to show examples of these exercises. This one's one of my favorites because when COVID pandemic came to our lovely world, this one became something I used in my house with my teenage boys and my husband. And then my coworker started using it. And then we started creating an exercise from it because we were like, well, all people should know how to do this. So this is called Flags of the Beach. And these are real beach flags that you would see whether you're on whatever ocean you're at. And the flags are nothing more than communicating something important. So these flags we are going to use to communicate emotions. So for kids, what we do is on the right-hand side, you'll see some really simple blank flags. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how to use those flags off of these colored ones so that you can use this at home to keep everybody calm under the emotional storm that we've all been under for so long. And it's really effective. And I definitely use my kids as rats first, no doubt. So at my house, we're not all exactly the same people. Some of us have bigger feelings than others. And so I can't always solve, and no one can solve my problems and I can't always solve their problems. But sometimes we just need to be met where we're at, and we just need the respect for someone. They just need to go, hey, you know what? I'm at a double red flag today, and this is how I feel. And I don't have to resolve the issue. I don't even have to provide solutions. I can just provide compassion and respect and recognize where that person's at just by these flags. So this is really big stuff, because no more arguing and yelling and screaming and crying, because what we're doing is we're demonstrating respect and compassion just simply by giving kids a language to express how they're feeling. And I know, Donna, you want everyone who's participating to actually try this one. Is that right?
Yes. So I would like for you all to take a moment and in the chat box, think about a recent situation where you felt your emotions rise, or where you felt like you could not think through any longer, or your brain was just so full. Take yourself back to that moment and think about how you felt using the beach like warning system, and add into the chat box where you were at with your flag in that moment.
And I'll give you a couple examples too, because I think the examples are really important. We've all had such a strange year. The double red flag is when you have two hearts. It's when you're all emotional and there's no thinking. You are 100% on the right side of your brain, feeling a whole lot of stuff. So when you see two red flags, you're thinking heart, double emotions. When you see a single red flag, you're thinking just one heart. So now maybe reason and logic might turn back on, because one single red flag is simply a high hazard, not a double red flag. So there's a difference, because we need our brain to turn back on. We have the back of our brain that wants to win. The emotions always want, but we need the prefrontal cortex to turn back on. So we need to calm down. First, we got to recognize it and go, all right, I'm a double red flag right now. Don't talk to me. Or I'm a single red flag. And then we go down to the yellow flag, which is really the precipice of, will I go up to double red, or will I come back down to green? That's what yellow does. It helps us determine, can we talk about this? We can talk about this if you're ready to listen. Are you ready to listen? And so it's not just one person listening. Everybody has to follow the same rules. Everybody has to listen. We have to hear, we get to name our feelings, and we get to say, this is how I'm feeling. But when we come down to the yellow red, or to the yellow flag, we're really trying to put words and reason and logic to it as well, so we can move into the green flag, which is all solutions and just self-expression. And the purple flag is personally my favorite, because I like to call it my COVID flag. I never really know if I'm safe when I go to the grocery store, if I'm going to get COVID. So we call that the purple flag. And the purple flag means that there is some dangerous creatures in the waters around you, and you don't know if you should be hyperactive, hyper-reactive, or hypo-active, right? So we don't know. Like, I don't know. Should I freak out? Is there a jellyfish that's about to sting me? Maybe I'll wait till it stings me, and then I'll freak out. So the purple flag is really interesting, because it's what we've been going through with COVID. We've all been in a state of purple flags for so long that it's important to just recognize sometimes that kids are there, and then we move on. So that's what we're going to do with those flags, is you're going to match those colors with, how do you feel when you're a double red flag? Can you think? When you're in the yellow flag, what takes you to the red or to the green? For me, I need to be heard. I need someone to listen to me, and then I can go down to the green. But if no one's listening, I might just hit that red flag. So you want to think about what works for you, and then you want to use this with kids, because it's different for everybody. Everybody gets to redefine their own flags.
Yep, and this is a good way too to just have a visual in that moment when the students can't talk to you, or your child can't talk to you, to just teach them the flag warning system ahead of time. And then when they can't talk or are not responsive, they could point to the flag, or you can point to the flag and say, it seems to me like you are in double red. I'm going to give you an X number of minutes to yourself, and then I'll come back and check on you. So not only can it be used as a discussion point, but it is a great way to introduce that visual and use it when a student is nonverbal, or any person in your life is nonverbal and unable to respond. And if you start teaching the cohesive language and using it, it'll just become part of their conversation naturally. And then as your child or student then progresses through their emotions, they'll be able to say, I'm red now, or I'm yellow, or even if the student is nonverbal, period, cognitively, they can still point and let you know how they're feeling and where they're at. And then when you're feeling those emotions, having those conversations, saying, today I woke up and I'm feeling a little like I have yellow flags all over, to warn other people too that maybe you're not in that state. And for teachers and advocates and counselors out there, when you're doing welcoming activities with your students, whether online or in person, you could always have the flag up. You could even put a little flag on each student's desk, and they could turn over where their flags are at any moment. So you could have a visual representation of where each of your students are at that moment in time, or when you're having a discussion about something. Because sometimes we're talking about things and you feel those emotions bubble, but you don't get the opportunity to share in that moment. So there's so many ways that you can utilize this in both remote and in-person learning and in your home life to get creative and show those visual connections without always having to speak the words, and to do check-ins with each other often.
And it's really important, because what happens is that when we all of us have emotions, and when our emotions crash into each other, they can get worse, and so what we want to do is we want to just be aware emotions are important. We don't want to crash our waves into each other. Let's just respect where we're all at. And so this is an example of a fourth grader this year who used, she doesn't love to write words, so these are pictures, but she just used her flags on the left side to explain to me how she feels when she hits each of these flags. And then on the right-hand side, those are some lovely waves that correlate with the flags. And we were talking about how big they can be, how big that double red flag is. And it's really interesting how just giving a visual and a language like this, a simple visual tool, it's amazing how much you can calm a situation down very quickly. I'll give you a quick example. Just in my house, one day I remember I was using this with my family, and my husband was trying to solve a problem for my 16-year-old son, and he lost it. He's like, Dad, I'm double red flag. And then my husband was like, why? And I was like, because you're in the green flag. And so they got it. Like, we didn't have to call each other names. We didn't have to sit there and argue about it. It was just a very quick, like, he's all right-brained right now, and you're coming in left and right, and it's just too much, and it's not the time. You just need to wait. And it communicated so much, and really, most importantly, it communicated respect, you know. And then, of course, my husband understood it, and I was like, oh, yes, simple communication. I love it. It's a really powerful tool. So this one is preventing a flood, because our emotions, as we talk about, flood our prefrontal cortex. Our emotions will just take over. So here we're talking about emotions like waves, giving that metaphor to kids. We talk about how they're different heights. Some waves are small and some are big. So what's my plan? So what is my flood plan? So what makes little waves become big waves for me? What triggers me? What sets me off? And so if you're thinking about it before the situation, you can really think through some amazing, powerful examples. But you can't really ask someone in the middle of it, like, okay, you're having an emotional flood. Let's sit down and do this exercise. Probably not the right time, because they're double red flag. So you even use that double red flag to say, are you ready to do this? Is this the time, or should we wait? You know, it tells you, are we ready for the next step in moving forward and learning another skill? And that's a really important decision we're getting.
Yep, and something else you can do with this too is have things, when your child or student is working, have things already labeled as they're working through what they need to do. Have things already labeled, have them label it with what color of flag, to say, this is something that I am ready to do, I can fall back on, and this is something that's really freaking me out right now, so that they can gauge, and you can gauge while you're working with them, how that assignment is feeling to them before you ever even start working on it. And that can help with prioritizing their work too. And oftentimes as educators, we think it's easier for students to start with something simple and then move to a harder task. But for many students, it's actually better to get the hard out of the way first and then move into the simple task. That way they have something to look forward to, and also getting their brains fresh before they're cognitively fatigued. Because when you move into those higher order thinking skills that they may be struggling with, that cognitive fatigue sets in with the difficult activities, then if you start with the easy activities first, by the time they get to the hard activities, their brain may already be tired. So that's just something to think about too, is flipping how you do things and or intermixing those more difficult tasks with easier tasks, and recognizing that cognitive fatigue and that emotional fatigue that comes along with each task.
So endurance is definitely important. And we talk about emotions first because we want to turn back on the ability to make good decisions. So we'll go to the next slide and see what that, oh yeah, this is a real student. And this is how we had, so here's a student who doesn't like reading, writing, or sitting. And so I still need her to read, write, and sit. I need her to do all of those things. So in order to do that, we negotiated. I said, all right, I'll get we're going to have to do something for like 11 minutes. She's in second grade. We're going to have to do something for 11 minutes, but then we're going to take a 2-minute break and we're going to come back. So this was our 2-minute break. So we decided this is what makes her happy. Her mom does a lot of yoga. And so we found beautiful ways for her to have 2-minute breaks between the work and the exercises that I'm asking her to perform and use her executive skills on. That's a hard skill to use. So we're going to have to take a break on it. And a lot of times we even tell kids when we're working on our executive skills, it's kind of like writing with the opposite hand. It doesn't feel comfortable, it's exhausting, and I get fatigued. So we're going to break it up with things like focus, calm, yoga, mindful meditation, those kinds of things. We'll go to the next slide. Because we have to do the work, right? We have to turn on our brain and use our memory and start organizing and categorizing to get stuff done. And for some kids, this is a skill that takes a long time to develop because organization is not, it's, executive functioning means essentially that it's not a very organized person. Some kids are born with the gift of organization and others just not so much. So in order to really learn how to organize things, we're accessing our memory and our learning style and saying, what do I need to put in place as a reminder to keep you accountable to the executive functioning that we're experiencing and learning? And the more often we do that, the stronger the pathways become, and then we have a habit over the course of time. So we have to talk about how will you remember and how will you dedicate your memory to organization. Fun stuff. And it actually can be really fun. There's some really creative things that kids come up with. So the learning style comes into place here, but I think we can skip this one. And here we're talking about our emotions. I feel like we just missed a slide, but that's okay. So this one's our emotions, and we're going to look at an exercise called the wise mind. So this is what we want the brain to be like when it's ready to do the next task. We want to admit in our culture, first and foremost, that emotions are okay. And that when we're actually teaching, there's emotions involved in teaching all day long, all the time, everywhere we go. Whether you know it or not, students are having an emotional reaction in your class. So we want to acknowledge that emotions are important, but we also want to acknowledge that, logic and decision making is equally important. So we call it the wise mind, where these two things are going to come together. And when we're in our wise mind, we're emotionally prepared to make decisions, and we're prepared to make wise decisions because we're using our emotions to help make those decisions. So this is the zone of, basically, like you're in the zone of performance is what we refer to it as. So when you're here, man, you can be here for a while, or you can chunk down time and just be in the wise mind for short periods of time. But the wise mind is where it all happens, and that's where our brain is on, and we're engaged and ready to learn and improve and learn harder and newer skills. Next slide. And so what happens while we're doing this is we have to be able to have the self-monitoring ability to continue to be persistent, consistent, and insistent that we're going to get something done. And so what we call that is just, are you persistent? Do you have grit in the game? Are you being consistent in creating a schedule and following through? Are you being insistent? Insistent meaning like you're going to get knocked off the horse, but you got to get back on, and you got to insist you're getting back on that horse. And we have these conversations and we use metaphors and visuals all the time because these aren't words they don't know because they can't know them. It's just we haven't introduced them. So we're going to introduce these words, these concepts with visual pictures and metaphors so kids can put themselves in that place and say, hey, how am I monitoring myself? And it might sound weird to say that to a student, but it's not weird at all because I learned this 25 years ago that we can do this with 3-year-olds through the Early Head Start program, that they actually monitor themselves at the age of 3 and bring in routines into homes that don't have routines. So we can do things at such a young age. And that's what this skill is all about, is being aware of monitoring myself. How's my effort? Am I doing a good job or am I not? And that's where the grit and persistence comes from. And we'll go to the next. And these are just examples of what that can look like. So tell me 2 things that went well today, or tell me something that went well last week, or tell me something that was really hard for you. So we're going to talk about highs and lows. We're not just going to talk about lows because we need to create neural connections to the highs. We need the highs to start stepping in and creating new neural pathways. So gratitude's a huge way to do that. Lots of science behind the value of just 3 minutes of gratitude a day being as efficient as a 30-minute walk. So creating all that dopamine and oxytocin and all that, just being grateful. We'll go to the next slide. And then this is the last one. Now this is the I think it's the last one. So here's where are we performing in the zone, right? So how long can we stay in the zone? So you'll see that this talks about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because we really do have to start at the bottom with kids and say, have you eaten, slept, and do you have water? And then we can build up on each of those layers to really get to where we're ready to perform. And then once we are performing, we're really chunking it down in time. So at the bottom, you'll see in the tips, it says 25-5. I'm going to show you what that looks like, because that's us using our brain in its optimal performance, its optimal zone, to learn for 20 minutes, take a break for 5, and then come back for the second round of 5 minutes and reflect on what I did for the first 20. So we're requiring our brain to remember. We'll go to the next slide. Oh yeah, this slide was supposed to be somewhere else, so I apologize, it's here. But this slide goes really neatly with the flags of the beach. And so this is really cool because on the left, you'll see a monthly mood tracker where these are each days of the month. And kids can choose colors to express how they felt on the first, the second, the third, the fourth of that month. And then over the course of a year, some really cool patterns start to effloresce and really start to show up. So pretty cool to see our monthly mood tracker on a monthly basis. And on the right-hand side, there are 24 words that we talk about that triggers people. So this is what could set off a red flag. This is what could make me cry. These are things that make me feel left out. And so we're using the words from the Gottman Institute, which is why it's referenced at the bottom there, because these are 24 sentences that people in relationships say to each other when they're fighting that really get at some powerful feelings. So you can look at this and you can say, all right, I'm going to pick, the top 8, or I don't know, Donna, if you want them to try it, you can pick like 3 and then try to match it with a color. And then you would indicate where, if you felt excluded or powerless, how would that connect to flags of the beach?
Yeah, so I wanted to take a moment with all of you for you to recall the situation that you did with the flags of the beach. Recall that in your mind. And in the chat box, pick between 2 and 4 statements here that triggered you. So, for example, if you felt forgotten and unloved, frustrated and lonely, put that in the chat box.
Or you don't have to share, because it can be personal, real personal stuff here. This is our hot button. So it can be pretty personal.
You can even take a moment in your mind just to think of that. Unheard, manipulated, disconnected and frustrated.
I used this in a meeting with my staff one day, and there was one person who kept talking over and over and over and didn't give anybody else the chance to talk. And my staff just drew a yellow flag and held the paper up, and that's all they had to do. They didn't have to say a word. I was like, oh, yellow flag. Okay, so this guy, yellow flag's coming up because no one else is able to share. So it helps in so many different environments too.
Yeah, and even when if you're in a relationship or even with your own children, from moment to moment, this is a great tool to use and be able to pull up. You could even have it on your phone and just say, how are you feeling now? And right then, boom, you can maybe start the discussion from there, because as we all know, if we can address the feelings of the situation, that helps us understand, empathize, and be able to move the discussion forward rather than just pushing those emotions to the side, which, like Jennifer said, in our society, we have so much trouble with that. Many of us have been taught that emotions are weakness, when in fact emotions are us. And so that's why we're human. That's what makes us human and makes us different and makes us be able to connect with each other, to have that empathy and develop trusting and strong, long-lasting relationships.
Yeah. And again, kids of all different ages can do this. They know these words. They know how these things feel. You might not think that they know, like, oh, you won't know what it's like to feel powerless. Oh, they know. I felt like I was the bad guy. I don't know why I felt like that, but I felt like I was the bad guy. So all different ages can use these words, which is what makes it so powerful. We'll go to the next slide. And we'll skip this one because I know from just by seeing who's on here, I know y'all have seen Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We just reference it here in case people hadn't seen it. But essentially, the point of this graph is just that we perform as we move up the scale. As we move up the triangle, we're actually able to perform in the red or in the zone. And this is the one I was just mentioning. So I'm going to take you back. I was just telling you that you want to use your brain to its optimal capacity. And so we know that as an adult, that's a 25-5 system. But at different ages, those numbers change. So for a first grader, if I'm teaching him something that's easy, I might start out at 5 minutes. If I'm teaching him something that's hard, I might start out at 3. And then what we do is then you adjust your clock. So we're going to try something for 3 minutes. We're going to take a 30-second break. And then you're going to remember to tell me what we did for the first 5 minutes. What were we doing there? And the reason why we're doing that activation approach is we're using our brain efficiently, but we're also activating cross neural pathways, creating new ideas and new experiences and new connections to that knowledge. So this system is super powerful. 25-5 again is for adults. And then you want to make it incremental to the developmental age that you're working with. And throw in a whole bunch
and think about too, like your brain, for me and probably many of you, my brain, when I'm doing mindless tasks like taking a shower, I often come up with great thinking because my brain is processing things that I've learned or heard but really didn't get the time to do so. And then you come up with great ideas when you're doing those mindless tasks. And that's also why our minds, when we're going to sleep at night, often struggle to stop, because we start processing. When our mind is at rest, it'll start processing our day, our thoughts, our feelings. And so take a moment to recognize those in that time when they come up. And then you can, like Jennifer suggested last time, doing mindful breathing and just breathing it away. And you can use that tactic with your students and yourselves at any moment. It's a very simple way to do this. Even just the 5-minute resting, focusing on your breath, and your brain will then process. You can get back up and be re-energized and recharged. Go ahead, Jen.
Yep, so that's great. It's a really powerful skill. So when you're looking at the rest section, your mind at rest is very, very busy, and you want to teach it something even while it's at rest. And we call those skills of soothing. Like, I'm going to teach myself how to take care of myself, soothe my body, soothe my mind, soothe my worries. So we're going to focus that second exercise on how do I take care of myself? And then go back and be like, okay, now tell me what we just did for the first section. And they have to. So it's really fun. It's a fun way to get through a lot of work. And we'll go to the next. I think that's my last slide if I'm correct. There you are.
All right. Thank you, Jen and Donna. Really appreciate your time. Does anyone have any questions for either of our presenters or any comments that they'd like to make? And feel free to unmute yourself if you would like as well. You don't have to do it in the chat box. All right, well, if no one has any questions or comments, that is all we have for you today. But before we let you go, we'd like to tell you about a few resources that are available to you. These are the same resources that were shared last week. So first we have our monthly SEL themes. This month obviously is executive function and time management. We also have executive functioning activities from Harvard University. These are available in both English and Spanish for your English language learners. We have executive functioning and time management grab-and-go activities for you guys so that you don't have to create a whole curriculum or a class around that. You can just grab these activities and go. And also, we really encourage everyone to stay up to date on future SEL forums like this one. And Ellen will add that link in the chat box for you. And also, before we go, we really would like you to fill out our feedback survey. We are always looking forward to improve our efforts through your feedback. So if you did not take this survey last time, we'd really appreciate it if you could take just 2 minutes right now to complete it. And Ellen also put that in the chat box. And other than that, guys, thank you so much for giving us your time and your attention this afternoon. We hope that you've gained a lot of insight, a lot of knowledge from this presentation, that you're going to move forward and use it in your classrooms and at home even. And for your convenience, we have added Jennifer and Donna's contact information to the chat box. So feel free to reach out to them with any of your questions or comments via email. And we hope the remainder of your day is wonderful. And we will see you next time. Thank you all so much.